Hi, I'm Andy Eastwood, welcoming you to the Octopus Ukulele Academy. On many musical instruments, we begin by playing one note at a time, so our first lessons concentrate on simple tunes and scales. So sometimes beginners on the ukulele are surprised to find that we start off by playing chords and get onto melodies and scales later on. But on the ukulele, it arguably takes more control to pick out individual notes than it does to just hit all four strings at the same time. So chords are where we begin. And the most basic and important are major chords. And they're what we're going to look at in this video. Now, I've just said that the major chord is the most basic, the most important. That's a pretty big statement to make. I'd better explain it. Of all the different kinds of chords we have, the major chord sounds the most complete, pleasant, satisfying and stable. Stable. That's a funny word to use to describe a chord. What do I mean by that? Well, other kinds of chords have tensions in them that need to be resolved. So if you hear a diminished chord like this, it sounds like it needs to move somewhere else, like this. When you hear a seventh chord like this, it sounds like it needs to move somewhere else, like this. When you hear a minor chord, it sounds dark and forbidding and gloomy. For instance, here's C minor. Compare that to C major, which sounds perfectly happy. Now you may have heard it said before that major chords sound happy, minor chords sound sad. Don't shy away from using that kind of description. Don't just dismiss it as arty people using fanciful language. There's a solid scientific reason why the major chord sounds the most natural. The frequencies at which the note in a major chord vibrate are all very closely related to one another, while in a minor chord they're much more out of phase. Now, if you want to understand the science behind this, go and read about the harmonic series. It's very interesting. If you don't, you can very happily forget all about that and just play the chords, safe in the knowledge that there is a genuine reason why different chords have different characteristics. But what you must do is learn to listen for those characteristics, recognize them and appreciate them, because they are what propels a piece of music from its starting point through all its twists and turns to its conclusion. So let's have a look at what's in a major chord. I've already mentioned C major. It's the easiest one of the lot, and for most people it's the first chord that you learn. It has three notes in it, C, E and G. That's the first, third and fifth notes of the C major scale. If you're not familiar with what a major scale is, it's a little series of notes that goes da 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 da. If I play the notes, they are C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Or if I describe them by number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If I wanted to make life difficult, instead of playing the scale down here, I could play it all on one string, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And when I reach the top C, I'm exactly halfway up the string at a pitch exactly one octave higher than the first note. So the frequency of this C is exactly double the frequency of this one. So these two pitches are so closely related that our brains recognise them as different versions of the same note. That's why we call this a C and this another C. So if the C major chord is made up of the first, third and fifth notes of the C major scale, that means we're missing out the second and the fourth. So we'll use C, miss out D, we'll use E, miss out F, and we'll use G. In fact, as you become more familiar with chords, you'll notice that notes that have a gap between them in the scale tend to sound more correct together than notes that are next to one another. So we use 1, 3 and 5 and they sound like this. That's a very neat sounding trio of notes. Well, actually, the word that we use for a three-note chord is a triad. Here's another bit of terminology for you. The note that the chord is based on is referred to as the root. So we might say that in a major triad, we have the root, third and fifth notes of the scale. Now, it would be very useful if you could learn to sing and recognise the way that this major triad sounds. Da da da. It reminds me of the announcements you hear at the airport over the PA system. They often use that major triad just to get your attention. Bong, bong, bong. Also, it reminds me of some very famous pieces of music. What about the Blue Danube Waltz? Da 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 da. Da 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 da. That very famous melody began with the three notes of the major triad. Another one that springs to mind is the old hymn tune, Morning Has Broken. Morning has broken. There they are again, the same three notes, the major triad. Let's think of something a bit more 21st century. What about the Bruno Mars song, Count on Me? The chorus begins, you can count on me. If we sat here for an hour, we'd probably think of 100 different examples. It doesn't really matter how you remember, as long as you do. If all else fails, a very convenient reminder is that 3 of the strings on your uke are tuned to the C major chord. C, E and G. Now, let's have a look at some examples on the uke. Okay, so here's the chord we've been discussing, C major. Now, when people write the name of the chord, they tend not to write C major, they just write C. As I said earlier, the major chord is the most basic type, so we assume a chord is major unless it's described otherwise. So if this was a different kind of chord, for example, minor, seventh, augmented or whatever, then the name of the chord would be the root, that's the note that the chord's based on, followed by a suffix to tell us what kind of chord it is. So if this was, say, B flat minor, then B flat would be the root of the chord, minor would be the type of chord. If it were F7, then F would be the root of the chord, 7 would tell us that it's a 7th chord. So if we're just given the root of the chord, we take it as read that it's a major chord. Now, you're probably very familiar with this chord because most people find this one within minutes of first picking up the uke. It's a C major chord. I've told you it has 3 notes and it's C, E and G, but hang on a minute, the uke has 4 strings and we're going to play all of them, so what's going on? Well, we've already said that 3 of the strings are tuned to the notes in the chord. But what about the A string? We can't play A, that's not in the chord. We can't play B flat, that's not in the chord either. Neither is B. But when we get to the 3rd fret, we're playing a C. That fits. So we have a C here and a C here, an octave higher. Anytime we play a major chord on the uke, one of the notes is going to be played twice. That's to say, played on 2 different strings. Let's have a look at another one. Here's the chord of D major. In this chord we need D, the root, and the 3rd and 5th notes of the D major scale. Well, D is 2 semitones higher than C, so count 2 frets up on the C string, and that's going to be D, the root of this chord. Remember what that major triad sounded like? If you sing it starting on this note, it'll sound like this. Da da da, and here are the notes. D, F sharp and A. Now in this chord we have 2 A's, one here, the 2nd fret on the G string, and one here, the open A string. So in the C chord we doubled the root, and in this D chord we're doubling the 5th. Let's work out another one. How about A major? Well, we have a string tuned to A, so that's going to be the root, and the notes are going to sound like this. Da da da. So what can we do with the G string? Well, that's none of those 3 notes. Neither is that. What about this? Yeah, that's the same as the A string, so we'll keep that. Now, what about the C string? Here are the notes we want. Da da da. That doesn't fit. What about this? Da da. Yeah, that's the 3rd, and it's C sharp. What about the next string, the E? Well, that sounds okay right away. Da da da. That's the 5th. And if you look up the chord diagram for A major in any book or online resource, this is what you'll see, the chord shape we just worked out. Here we have 2 A's in the chord, so we've doubled the root, and we have the 3rd and 5th voiced lower than the root, but it still has that clear, distinctive, bright, cheerful sound of a major chord. Let's have one more example. Here's another easy major chord you can play with just 2 fingers, F major. Now 2 of the strings are the same as the chord we just looked at. Again, we have the 2nd fret on the G string, and we have the open A string, so we have 2 A's in the chord, but we've moved that 1st finger from where it was in the A chord to the E string instead. So now we've revealed the open C string and we've raised the pitch of the E string by 1 semitone, giving us F. So this is the root, F, and if the notes are going to be da da da, that means we've doubled the 3rd, which is A, and we've played the 5th, which is C, at a lower pitch than the root and the 3rd. So, what have we learned? Well, we've discovered the importance of major chords. We've established that they sound pleasant, cheerful, stable, complete and natural. We've learned which notes have to be added to the root to form the major chord and how they relate to the major scale. We've learned what they sound like so that we can sing them and recognise them when we hear them. We've looked at 4 examples of major chords, C, D, A and F. So if you haven't learned to play those already, that would be a good next step. If you have, well, there are another 8 for you to have a go at. There are 12 different notes in total, and each one can have a major chord built on it. So if you learnt one per day, you get through the whole lot in less than 2 weeks, but some will be more useful than others, so I suggest you begin with the ones that appear in the songs you're learning, because there are other types of chords to give your attention to as well. But if there's one more thing I'd like you to take away from this lesson, it's this. When you learn to play a chord, don't just figure out the finger positions and leave it at that. Think about the notes within the chord. Play them individually. Listen to them. Sing them. Work out which note is which is the highest pitch, which is the lowest, which notes are doubled. It's all part of learning to think like a musician, and later on, you'll be glad you did. Bye for now.